position as a moral judge, I think you should keep quiet. Because with that much blood on the barrister's head, you have no right to speak. I will speak, because I don't have that blood on my head.
Alright, everyone. Once again, episode 4, Average Canadian Time. The last episode that you will witness me in this format. So you will no longer see 4 Average Canadian Tie episodes every month. It will be 2 Average Canadian Tie episodes, after which it will be followed by Outspoken Citizen X, The Philosopher's Stone, and The Lab, followed up by an end-of-the-month Average Canadian Tie to sum up everything. So be excited. Things are coming along. I've got the intro bumpers and everything like what you just heard 2 seconds ago as I started to talk. I've got the new ones done for the other shows, except for The Lab. I had one done, and my computer crashed in the middle of doing it, so that was exciting. Note the sarcasm. Okay, so today's show, just a little bit about, the updates, things that have been going on. My website has been coming along quite significantly. I actually am in the works of putting together a PHPBB forum, so anybody who's listening, it will be available and will be able to comment and socialize away from the watchful eye of social media. So the only person moderating and administering will be me, and potentially others depending on how time flows. But at the end of the day, again, we can have some under the radar conversations in a private place about whatever it is we want. That'll be there within the next couple weeks. So keep an eye out for that. There should be updates. I'll have a link that'll be up on the website. You'll probably see it pop up out of nowhere. The website's pretty easy to navigate, so when it's there, you'll notice it. Okay, so a couple little things before I get into the substance of the show. There are already Facebook groups for the Average Canadian Tie podcasts, all of them. I say that's plural because you need to know that all of them will have their own unique sort of pages. Once February hits and I have everything hosted, I will also have a Twitter page, an Instagram, and all those kinds of things. So keep an eye out for those as well. And once that happens, my link tree and everything will come together, the website. It's all just going to be one big package. So in any case, upcoming, I'm going to play a little bit of a Social Clusterschmuck. So this should be more what you should get used to when addressing the Social Clusterschmuck segment in the Philosopher's Stone shows. So I actually had a great example for it come up on Twitter the other day. And before I get into any many details here, I'm just going to play out the interaction. You guys can hear it. So get yourself set to hear your very first ever, drumroll please,
Social Clushterschmuck.
If you hit your dog, what does the dog do? It cowers from you. Are you building a bond with the animal? No. Spanking breaks the parent-child bond. So, I mean, this is a pretty obvious statement. Most people would agree, don't hit kids. You know, that's obvious. But it was the comparison between a dog and a kid that kind of struck me to engaging with him in the first place, and then the rest pursued from here. But from another angle, if I have a rebellious teenager who is getting involved in gangs and he isn't responding to any of my level-headed approaches to get him to desist, and I hear there's a violent something planned somehow and he's involved, I'd beat his ass for damn sure. So here I just came up with a hypothetical scenario to why one might go to an extreme, really. Sounds like you failed that teenager. But then this guy comes in talking to me like, sounds like you failed that teenager by not teaching him correctly and now punishing him with violence for it. First of all, this is a hypothetical scenario, and second of all, you can do everything right and a person can still go down the wrong path. The people with the best upbringings can turn out terrible, and vice versa. Use your critical thinking, please.
My critical thinking skills tell me that it's not okay to use violence against children. If you used yours, you'd realize there are other ways of teaching children other than beating them. Be smarter than child.
Beating them is hyperbole at work. But okay. I agree wholeheartedly with your sentiment, but I'm not being closed-minded to the notion that some extreme circumstances may call for things I'd never consider. For you to talk to me like I wouldn't take my kid to skip rocks and talk deep about how he feels about stuff as a first measure, because I'm able to consider abstractly, with practical awareness of psychology and sociology, extreme unlikely scenarios that might lead to extreme solutions, is just projection to me. And he comes in with the most ridiculous reply of all time, the following: don't hit kids, plain and simple. Does anyone remember a single part of this entire moment where I advocated for hitting kids? I don't know, it seems to have fallen out of my head. I don't remember that happening. I love how you wrapped a hypothetical scenario about a gang-affiliated troubled teen who could be killed into a summarizing statement to argue against me, don't hit kids. Very propaganda-like, very narcissist gaslight tactic. I agree with you, and never disagreed with this. So that's pretty much how the interaction ended up going there. It was kind of awkward. I was like, this is so strange for you guys to, like, project out on me that I'm saying, like, you shouldn't hit kids. You just came in here and said, if my kid was about to be killed, I would hit him to make sure that he doesn't die. And I'm now disagreeing with you. You should let your kid die instead of hit him, so that way after he's dead, you can say, well, at least I didn't hit him. Like, that's just the stupidest thing I've ever heard in my entire life. Like, I'd rather my kid be alive and be able to reflect on the fact that I love him enough to save his life. Like, this one woman was coming in like, you don't understand gangs. If you were to do that, they might come after you next. So I was like, oh, okay, so in the end, like, you'd let your kid die so you could live just to protect yourself? Like, at least I'm safe. Like, okay, so you guys are all arguing that I'm a bad parent because I would hit my kid because I would save his life, and because I'm not like you, I wouldn't let my kid die to save my own life, or, you know, like, what is wrong with you people? How are you arguing from a moral high ground, pretending like, hey, you're the bad person coming in here talking like you're so good, but you're actually the worst one because you would save your kid's life. We're all here pretending we're the best because we'd let our kids die, because violence is never the answer. You should never stand up for things that you believe in enough. And that's not the problem with masculinity in the world we live in today. Like, come on, people. Get a frickin' life. Grow up and realize that there is no absolute answer. You can't say, okay, violence isn't the answer, we found the answer, and now every time there's a question of violence, it's no, because we figured out that violence isn't the answer, and that's the absolute answer. That's not how it works. Sometimes the things that you'd prefer not to do are necessary, and you have to figure out, that's what wisdom comes from, when and where and the contextuals that make it so you have to respond that way. And when it comes down to it, people, every individual, feels these things out in the moment that they're living and does it the best that they can, and nobody's perfect. So at the end of the day, that's just how it goes. You can't judge a person for what they did in their shoes because you weren't in those shoes. It's like how everybody went off on Kyle Rittenhouse and like, oh, he's a killer and he shouldn't have been there and all this stuff. And they didn't know all the details. They didn't know that his mother lived in Kenosha, and that he worked in Kenosha, and he lived there regularly and knew people there, and that he was there protecting the community from hundreds of people who weren't even from there at all, and then we're like, he shouldn't have gone there with a gun to defend the place that he lives from people who don't live there, who showed up with guns. We justify those people who showed up with guns protesting because they are protesting against something I believe in. This guy showed up protecting the businesses which he believed in, but I don't believe in the things that he believes in, and so he was defending what he believed in, and therefore he's unjust. And since he ended up killing people who attacked him for what they believe in, while he was protecting people and had an instrument of deadly force in his hands to defend himself with, and they ended up dying, now he's a piece of shit. So it's all the same kind of logic, man. You know, it's just like Kenny Rogers pointed out in his song Coward of the County. You don't want to be violent most of the time, but sometimes in life there are things that you need to stand up for and you need to be violent for. But in the end, everybody just thinks that their position is the only one that is worth standing up for. But the reality is that we all have these feelings, and that if we're going to be empathetic human beings, we have to realize that that person feels as strongly for their feelings as I do for mine, and is willing to get violent for those. Now, and in this case, this man was defending his own life. That's what he was doing. He wasn't standing up for an ideology. He was protecting the livelihood of businesses, and he was protecting himself. Just like in Coward of the County, the gentleman was standing up for the integrity of his wife not being raped and ravaged, just like the protesters were trying to do to the city. Now, I do not take away from what they were protesting for and what they were trying to achieve with their protest, because by all means it is a big deal. But a protest of that nature is not something that is okay. When people who are protesting for masks act less violently than that, they get booted away from Parliament and the Emergencies Act gets put in. But when you're protesting for something else, you're allowed to be violent. Everybody's just thinking about how awesome they are in their own head with their own narcissism and egos and all that kinds of stuff, and it just sets us all on this huge tirade against each other of egotistical bullshit. And I honestly implore each and every one of you, when you feel yourself in that fight or flight mode and you're arguing, to stop, think about what you might be wrong about. I'm not saying relinquish your argument. I'm saying reformulate your argument after considering that you might be wrong in some way or form. Because in most circumstances, if you have a point that's in your mind that you want to make, there's probably something to it. It's just that you are now in a cooperative moment with other people, and you need to hear what they have to say, and then figure out how those two things go together, not how one overwrites the other. And that's cooperation. That's communication. That's working together. That's the opposite of ego. Now, ego is there and important for coming up with ideas, inspiration, ambition, courage, and those kinds of things, so don't get rid of your ego, but keep it in check, you know? So that's today's Social Clusterschmuck. Pretty decent. I mean, I think it was kind of a dumb little thing, but whatever. I have to give thanks to Colby for taking the screenshots, because the guy who started the thread blocked me in the end. Yeah, thanks a lot, Colby, and congratulations to you for your baby. Little baby girl, if I remember correct. Leah, if I'm right. Sorry if I'm wrong, and I'm live on my podcast right now, buddy. Let me know in message, because I know you'll be messaging me to let me know. So anyways, moving along, I noticed that through this month I haven't really covered a lot of what I would be covering in the lab. And the lab obviously being the sort of culture, arts, entertainment, music, movies, that kind of stuff side of things. Excuse me. This particular episode, I had an idea, as I saw a thread on Twitter as well, where somebody was talking about your dream rap supergroup. I thought that would be a great sort of addition to our podcast here. So I made a supergroup here, and the artists, the 6 rappers to which I would pick are as follows: Eric Jamal from Coast Contra, J. Cole, Lupe Fiasco, De Niro Ferrar, who's a cult rapper, great lyrics, Azizi Gibson, and Kid Cudi. Now, if you haven't heard any one of those guys, any individual one of those guys, I'd recommend going to check them out, because by far and away, all of them are lyrical beasts. However, there's also a singer, a DJ, and producer to add to the list, so I still have BJ the Chicago Kid. Once again, amazing singer. If you haven't listened to BJ the Chicago Kid at all, you're missing out, very, very much missing out. The guy is just a wonder when it comes down to it. DJ Shadow for the DJ. If you haven't heard DJ Shadow, I mean, honestly, once again, all of these you're missing out on. If you haven't heard any one of these, this is my super group. But DJ Shadow is just one of those, eclectic, sort of, he's got that sort of mystique about him. His music is very, ominous, but, cool and fun. I don't know, it's just something about it. It gives it an ambiance that you just don't really get anywhere else. And Fat John for the producer, which, again, most people probably haven't even heard of him, but his instrumentals are so sound. They are so good. They are so enjoyable by themselves, without lyrics. So throw in some really good lyricists on there, and by far and away, you're enjoying a good time. So that was my super group, but I came up with a couple of them. And I wasn't sure which way to go, because that's like my kind of like lyrical, sort of interesting philosophical group of MCs with like deep introspective DJs and that kind of thing. But then I started thinking to myself, man, it would be cool to get like a group of them guys with them like deep voices that are like really, they just sound really cool. So I made another super group of 6 guys that I find have just really cool rap voices. So they are as follows: Bless from Shawmen, Rock Ness Monster from Helta Skelta, Charlie Tuna from Jurassic 5, Raka Iriscience from Dilated Peoples, Del the Funky Homo Sapien from the Tribe Called Quest, and Esoteric from the Demigods. All those guys, I actually took verses, like acapellas, from each of those guys, and I put them onto the producer that I picked here's Beat Shlomo, who's just like a great instrumentalist as well. And it sounds cool. I'm not a producer by any stretch of the imagination, so there are definitely some elements that I know need to be blended and different things need to be done to make it sound like it's cooler, but they fit on the beat. It sounds right, just a little bit off in certain places. But that having been said, the DJ I've got for them is DJ Crush. And then the singer is Socrates, who's a Canadian rapper, but he's also done soul singing and things like that. He's actually a great vocalist. So if you haven't heard of Socrates, shout out to Socrates if you ever end up listening to this podcast. Mad respect for that drink you bought me way back in Orangeville. But in any case, yeah, so that was that. And the cool thing actually is, out of those 2 lists that I made, Azizi Gibson liked the first one, the one that he was a part of, so obviously he would like that. But I always like it whenever artists that I respect and interact with my tweets and stuff like that. It's always kind of a nice little cool. And then I noticed a bunch of people were making just like the legendary supergroups. So I was like, all right, if we're going to go into the legends here, because I was trying to go like original artists, not the like everybody knows these guys are going to be a part of the supergroup group. But here it is from me: Rakim, Guru, Cool G Rap, Jeru the Damager, OC, and Pharaoh Monch, with a singer of Nate Dogg, producer of Justifiable Babu from Dilated Peoples. Now I think that would be a phenomenal album with all those guys. I mean, that's just cool. Anyways, it's fun to do these activities. I always find it's fun just talk about who we would put on these super groups. It's even more fun when you have somebody else to talk to about it. And I don't have a co-host yet, so I want to put that out there. Everybody who is listening, I am looking for a co-host. I want somebody local, somebody I can sit with and talk with, bounce ideas with. I don't want something like Zoomy or like, over the internet and that kind of stuff. It might be cool. I actually have maybe 1 or 2 people I would make exceptions for over the internet. John and Eric. I think I've talked to both of those guys and neither of them are interested. John thinks he needs to get himself more learned. John, you don't need to get more learned. You are more of an learned man than the majority of people that I speak to. And you're a juggalo, which makes it even better. No, I'm just kidding. I'm picking on you, buddy, locally. Right up on the public podcast. All right. So, anyways, that's a little bit about the lab and what I was talking about there. Now, on the actual episode of the lab that's coming this month, I am going to be submitting a review for the movie Citizen Kane. Now, it's obviously a pretty old movie, but I've enjoyed it so far, so I'll talk a little bit more about it on the next episode, because obviously that's going to be sort of I'm going to need some content, and I don't always have all the time in the world to be watching 100 movies, so the movies that I do pull in, they're definitely going to be filling the content of the lab for the month. Obviously the music as well. If you can think of any cool TV shows, at the end of the day, you can always tweet me at ONERYT on Twitter, at OneRight, and just let me know, hey, you should watch this movie. I'd really love to hear your thoughts on it, or listen to this artist, or listen to this, whatever the case, whatever media that you think would be cool to hear my thoughts on, send it my way, and I'll take a listen whenever I get a chance and make some commentary, because that's kind of how I want to do these things. I want to interact with my audience. I want people who actually listen to say, like what do they want to hear? What do they want to look into? If you're here listening to me, obviously you're interested in hearing what I have to say. So share along. Even political things, whatever the case may be. We're going to be having some cool little things pop up on the next Outspoken Citizen X. I'll be talking about it. Actually, I could talk about it now. So we're going to be doing something called, it's kind of like Speaker's Corner. I'm not going to tell you exactly what the name of the branding is, because the branding is going to be fun whenever it gets like kind of surprise released on the date that Outspoken Citizen X has its inaugural podcast episode. But it'll be kind of like Speaker's Corner. So if you don't know what Speaker's Corner is, it was basically like a little thing in the corner of Toronto and Montreal, major cities, where individuals could walk up, push a button, and it give them like 2 minutes of rant time, where they could rant about whatever it is that they actually were thinking about in their life at that particular point in time, or talk about, actually, it doesn't even have to be talking. It could be singing. You could be professing some favorite part of your movie with you and a friend, acting it out. That was Speaker's Corner. You could go and you could do whatever it was, and then the best of the best would end up being put onto Much Music and on TV and things like that. It was sort of an early version of YouTube almost. But what I would like to do is somewhat similar to that, is have my listeners submit to me 1 to 2.5 minute long rants about something that matters to them, and once it's submitted to me, I would listen to it. I would put it into the Outspoken Citizen X podcast, and after it was finished, I would then obviously discuss whatever research or whatever ideas that I had come to upon listening to it in the first place. Because I won't be listening to it live for the first time on the podcast. I'm going to be generating a general opinion and sort of fleshing out the subject for the listener who submitted it, and for other listeners to get an idea of different things that average Canadians think about on a daily basis. Now, you could be American, you could be British, you could be from wherever. If you want to submit things for me, I'm fine with that. I will analyze whatever information you send my way. But, I mean, I'm imagining a portion, or at least a good chunk of my audience will be Canadian, so I guess I shouldn't generalize, but I will a little bit on my 4th episode. Once I get a better idea of what my audience actually is, what the statistics of who's visiting and who's listening are, then I can start targeting and doing things a little differently that way. But until such time, I'm not really quite there yet. So that's that. Now, for my last little subject that I'd like to talk about today, I would like to talk about Andrew Tate. Now, I have kept my hands off of this subject for a long time. He's a controversial figure. People see me as a right-wing, prejudicial guy, even though I'm very centrist. And so with hot-button issues, I tend to keep my hand off until I've had a time to sort of process how I feel about things. And so here is kind of, after having processed what I feel, what I came out with. And ultimately, when it comes to Andrew Tate, I have 2 feelings. Number one is, if he is responsible for human trafficking, if he has been involved in human trafficking at all, if I put a big if, because, you're not guilty until proven so in the court of law. If he actually is implicated and found guilty for that, I don't ever want to be on the side of the fence that was defending the man. And so I'm not defending him. I'm keeping my mouth shut. However, on the other hand, if it turns out that the folks who are pushing the news stories and trying to sort of conflate the situation into something maybe bigger than it actually is, if he's innocent, for example, that is something I can't get on board with, especially if he's being used as some form of scapegoat, or if human trafficking is being used in order to sway public opinion because it is such a head swinger when it comes down to it. If that accusation is being used to smear the man for the benefit of those who would benefit from his reduction in sort of attention and what he gets online, then that to me is wrong too. You should never use such a serious issue like human trafficking as a pawn in your game to try to win political appeal. It's just not okay. It's completely inappropriate and disgusting. And, when you see something like Epstein get swept under the rug, and all of his cohorts and all the names of the people involved get swept under the rug literally by the courts, and then next thing you know, they want to use human trafficking as the sort of moral centerpiece to judging a man who they disagree with. Now, granted, there's quite a bit that I've seen from him that's controversial and things that I would never want to comment on because, honestly, some of the things that he has said that I've seen in video are, like, disgusting, like, about young women and things like that. It's just, like, if you clear-cutly and explicitly think like that and there's no, like, you're just so cognizant and sure of what you're expressing when you're saying it, that's a problem. Like, you shouldn't be so sober-minded about, like, those morally gray areas. It should be something where you're kind of like, it's not even morally gray in a lot of the cases, but, different circumstances can be morally gray. So I don't want to generalize. I don't want to get into the details of any particular accusation either, because I really don't know enough about the accusations to do that. But by and large, I'm just generalizing, which I know that generalizing isn't always the best, as paying attention to nuance is very important, and I very often say that. But in this particular instance, I'm waiting to see where the judgment goes. And, if there's anybody that's out there that hears me saying this and wants to share information with me about him, that, you know what, this is really damning, man. You should really pay attention to this. Go ahead. I'm not against it. I'll admit I'll probably take a devil's advocate perspective, because that's what I would hope someone would do for me if I was in a situation that I was innocent, but 100 people out there had made it look like I was the worst person in the world. It's easy to make things look a certain way, and I'm very cognizant of that fact. And so, because of it, I am wary to jump to judgment against people. So, in the end, when it comes down to it, I don't defend the man, and I don't condemn the man. I am waiting to see what happens before I can generate a feeling, because really, at the end of the day, I hadn't paid too much attention to who he was in the first place. I knew that he was sort of a right-wing guy that everybody judged and didn't like, and this and this and that, but in my opinion, like, I don't go looking to hear what somebody has to say just because they're labeled right-wing. They have to say something rather interesting, novel, or, with some intricate kind of like, wow, that just gave me an aha moment. Something, and it's some kind of substance. For me, all he is really is just a rich guy that pumps up all of his money and things like that, and whatever, who cares? And, that's just whatever. That doesn't impress me. I don't care. Like, you could be a poor man, and I could be more impressed by you. And that's just the facts. Like, you could be a generous poor man and live happily, and I'd be more impressed than a man who's up there in a mansion with his cigars, acting with all of his bravado and his narcissism. Because, honestly, to have all that money and not be able to tackle your mental health issue of narcissism, that's got to be a problem. Like, come on. Get on it. Recognize your priorities and do something about it. Be humble. Humility is one of the biggest virtues. But anyways, maybe he is a humble guy. I don't think so. Not after what he did with Greta Thunberg, but Thunberg with that tweet and everything. Oh, I got all these cars and and look at my cigar in my video that I'm making. Speaking of Greta Thunberg, we got 2 minutes or so left to the podcast. I saw a video the other day of Ezra Levant and one of the other journalists from The Rebel, and they were following her to the Davos meeting or conference. And there was a bunch of other journalists, But, like, those two journalists were just bombarding her the entire walk. Like, no other person was able to ask any questions. And, I mean, some of it was funny. Some of it was like, okay, somebody should be asking these questions. But, like, by and large, it was like, can you just treat her like a normal human being for a second? Like, come on. Like, you're a little overzealous sometimes. And which is fine. I mean, by all means, that's the news that you portray, and you're trying to cater to a specific audience, and that's what they're looking for. But I don't know. I just think like that's problematic if our news ends up being stuck in a way, being like that, following what people are looking for as opposed to following what the truth actually is. And anyways, it's just all shock value, and you could see it in the video, and I just didn't really like their approach. I mean, there was some hilarity to it. Even Greta laughed quite a bit in the whole situation, but when it comes down to it, I mean, like, I'm not a fan of any particular person in these situations. I've never met any of them, so I don't know if I like them or dislike them on a personal level, and I've never gotten to have an actual debate where they heard my thoughts and reacted to my thoughts, so I'm not going to sit here and judge any one of them. But that video, I was like, Ezra Levant, you kind of look like a Nimrod. No offense, my friend, no offense. You're not my friend, I never met you before, but I'll just say my friend because it's colloquialism, that's the way I speak. At the end of the day, you do what you do, I'll do what I do, she'll do what she does, and we'll all just be us. And that's just how the world's always going to go. So anyways, once again, this was Tyrone on the Average Canadian Type Podcast. We're approaching 30 minutes, so once again, it's me signing off. Sayonara.